Hello, welcome back to my second ever video. Today I'm going to be talking about my best books of the year so far. So let's go ahead and get into it. If you watched my first video, which is the mid-year freakout tag, I shared my favorite book of the year. So I'm just going to share that one first. Is that a bad idea? Is it a bad idea to share that one first? Okay, maybe I'll save it to the end. So these aren't gonna be ranked by any means. I'm going to talk about these in the order that I read them throughout the year, and then the very last one will be my favorite book of the year. But otherwise they're not ranked. So I'll go ahead and start with the first book I read this year, and these were all 5 stars. So the first one I read this year, which was the very first book I read this year, is Heartstopper, Volume 4. We love to see it. We love to see it. It's so good. I mean, like, I don't need to tell people it's so good. Everyone knows it's so good. This is the first book I read this year. I planned it for the first book I read this year because I figured it was going to be 5 stars. Absolutely loved it. Love the series. I don't have a favorite in the series, I don't think, but I really did love this one, and I like where this set the story up for the next one. So good. For people who don't know, which I'm sure the vast majority of people know, but if you're a lucky person who doesn't know this yet and this is your introduction to it, yay for you. This is a love story between 2 teen boys. And in the first one, they're kind of meeting and falling in love. So very, very good. The art style is very cute. The US editions are done by Graphics, and they have color, but it's all monochromatic. Whereas I know the UK editions don't have color, because I actually have the UK edition for the very first volume. So that is the first one that I read this year. The second favorite book I read this year, I think I also read this in January, but I can't quite remember, and that is The Wolf Den by Elena Harper, and this is published by Head of Zeus. So first of all, this cover, just freaking gorgeous, so gorgeous. And this book takes place in Pompeii, but does not include the volcano. I mean, it's referenced to, but it's not, none of the plot has to do with the eruption, which I love, because I feel like if you read about Pompeii, it's about the eruption. So it's about a group of women, but one woman in particular is the focus. What was her name? Amara is her name. And they all work in basically a brothel, and they're all essentially, slaves. They're owned by the owner of the brothel. And it's about kind of the horrors that go on with that. It's about how each woman came to be there and their life circumstances that led them to be there, which are all very different. And it's also about Amara really trying to get out of her situation. She is trying whatever she can to get out of this situation. There's so much camaraderie between the women that was amazing. The characters are so richly developed. That's part of why I really loved this. You root for Amara so much. She's brilliant, she's educated, she is beautiful, and she will basically kind of stop at nothing to try and change her circumstances. So this is really good. This is going to be a trilogy, I believe, and I think the next one is The House with the Golden Door, which I know in the US is out already. I'm sure it's out in the UK too, because I think this actually got published there first. So I will be reading that one as well, but so good. And I don't read a lot of historical fiction, and I very much enjoyed that. The next book I read that is on my favorites list, this one is probably going to be not known. I've never seen anyone else talk about this, and that's Thirst by Amelie Nothomb. And this is translated, let me grab the translator. This is translated from the French by Alison Anderson. And this book I had not even heard about, but it was on the recommendations like section at one of my local indie bookstores, and the review was like glowing and it sounded very interesting. So this is, ooh, how do I describe this? Well, first of all, it's very short. It's a novella. It's under 150 pages. It's actually under 100 pages, I think. And this takes place, oh man, this takes place in the 48 hours before Jesus is crucified, and it takes place from his perspective, but it's almost satirical in some regards. Like, it's funny. Like, this book was so funny, which is surprising because it takes place 24 hours before someone's getting crucified. But really, really funny. She did a great job. The writing style is very sparse and sarcastic, but so good. Really enjoyed this. If you like religious commentary, if you like satires, definitely read this. I would say you need to like both, right? So you can't just like religious commentary and read this and like love it. I think you need to like religious commentary and satires in order for this to work for you. But if that does sound like your jam, highly recommend. So good, and you can read it so quickly. I read it in one sitting. Loved it. All right. Next book I read this year that I loved is a poetry collection, and it's I Hope This Finds You Well by Kate Baer. And Kate Baer also wrote What Kind of Woman, which I also really enjoyed, but I like this one slightly better. And this is my favorite poetry collection I've read this year so far, and I've read a decent amount already, at least 5, if not more. And this is my favorite one. This one is, oh, what do they call the style of poetry? I can't remember what they call it, but it's where like she takes like a comment, for example. So like this is like a comment that like a news article that someone wrote, like a portion of it, and then she basically takes out, what's the best way for you to see this? Is that the best way? There we go. She takes out a bunch of the words and then comes up with a new poem with just the words that she's left in. And a lot of times it's like flipping the narrative of the original text. So it's so good. It's very moving. It's very much like feminist poems. So a lot of the stuff is like the original text is sexist, and then she's removing words in order to make it feminist. And it's also removing a lot of the words to show really like the true nefarious intent of the original text, that they're kind of churching up to make it sound better than it is, and she's showing like, no, when you say this is really what you're saying. Like this is the bare bones truth of it when you say stuff like this. I loved it for that. I thought the commentary was amazing. This thing touched me so good. Okay, the next book that I read and absolutely loved, I don't own, I read this from the library, and that is Vladimir by Julia May Jonas. And I know this book has gotten lots of buzz. The cover is gorge. I love the cover. I really want to own it. But this book, I know some people did not like it. I loved it. The story is essentially about this woman who I believe is in her 60s, and she is married to a man who's basically had like a Me Too movement scandal. They're both professors at a college, and a bunch of women have come out to say that they were his students and he had sex with them. And basically they've been in an open relationship. She knows that this was happening, And she kind of subscribes to the idea that the women, that it was consensual, basically, and that they like wanted to have sex with him, and like isn't really, I mean, she addresses the power dynamic, but she says that that's what they're drawn to. Like they were drawn to his power and they wanted that, so they were willing participants in that, which is very much like an opinion of her time. So she's in her 60s, right? So I think this is part of what I love about this book is Julia May Jonas shows so many like differences between the generations, and she's giving you like what would be some of the like stereotypical opinions from each generation. So that's like very much an opinion of someone from that time, which I think is really interesting commentary to play against the young women. And then in addition to that, there's also this new younger professor called Vladimir, and she starts having this like obsession for him, and like the plot is about how that obsession unfolds. It goes to a very weird place at the end. I know some people talk about this. I liked how weird it went, and I sort of feel like that needed to happen in order for the book to end where it did, and I like where it ended. I think the commentary on Lolita is great. I mean, obviously it's called Vladimir, and like he wrote Lolita, or the author who wrote Lolita, his first name is Vladimir. And thinking about who Vladimir is in this book and then the author, I think there's this really interesting like dynamic of exploitation, and the Vladimir in the book is like 100% exploiting his wife, and there's this whole storyline around that, like exploiting her story. She's had a very traumatic story, and like that thread of exploitation compared to like the author of Lolita kind of like exploiting that experience of a young girl, I think was very, very interesting. I loved that aspect of it. But there were so many smart things about this book, I thought, and I really loved it. In addition, like it's pretty plotty, like it's kind of a romp, and I enjoyed it. I thoroughly enjoyed it and think it has a lot of good things to say. So the next one is, let's see, Hook, Line, and Sinker. Now I need to, how many have I talked about? Am I only talking about 10? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 9, 10. Okay, I only have 10. I had to recheck my list. So Hook, Line, and Sinker is my favorite romance I've read so far this year. It's the second in the Bellinger Sisters series. The first one is It Happened One Summer, and It Happened One Summer I read because it's supposed to be a Schitt's Creek inspired romance. And like Piper, the main character, is supposed to be like an Alexis type of character. And then this one follows her sister, Hannah, and her love interest is Fox. I loved this one for a couple of reasons. One, I just thought it was a really well plotted romance, so I was hooked the whole time. For a romance, you know, it was like generally believable what was happening. It wasn't like so much convenience that it was like no way this would happen. I thought their dynamic, like their chemistry was so good. He is like sensitive and vulnerable, but doesn't know it and doesn't know how to fully be that with a woman. He very much sees him as a womanizer, and so does everyone else. And that has become his like narrative of himself. And she like opens up a door for him to be something other than that. And I loved that storyline for him. And for her, she's like really trying to start a career that she loves. She's very into music. She's currently like a PA on a production for a movie, and is trying to like bust into the music side of it, but is pretty, what would I say, timid. And that's partly because Piper is such a big personality. She's always been like a more mild personality, and it's her kind of like coming to terms with who she is and really having some confidence in herself and her talents. So I loved that. Another thing that I loved about this, and this is a part of the steamy part, is this book had a masturbation scene in it, which, like, we love to see it. We need to see more of it. We need to see more women masturbating. So this has it. It was super steamy. Loved it. We need more of it. So that was Hook, Line, and Sinker. Oh, and that's by Tessa Bailey, if I didn't say that. Next one is Elena Knows by Claudia Pinheiro. This is translated from the Spanish by Frances Riddle. And this book, I mean, I said this before, this book is just like objectively an amazing, amazing book. Like, people can catch these hands if they don't think this book is great, because, like, how? So this book is about Elena, whose daughter has just committed suicide, and she feels that the circumstances under which that happened do not point to suicide, and that her daughter would not do that and would not do it in the way that it happened. And so she is trying to investigate on her own, because the police have ruled that it's a suicide and basically aren't looking into it anymore. So she's trying to investigate on her own to see what actually happened to her daughter. And this is following, like, the 24 hours after she finds out. Is that true? It's not the 24 hours after she finds out, but it does take place within 24 hours. That's what I'm trying to say. And so she feels like there's this woman that she's trying to get to that she thinks can help her figure out what happened. We don't necessarily know, like, how she knows this woman, what the circumstances are with that relationship or anything like that. And she also, Elena, has Parkinson's, and she's in, like, the later stages of Parkinson's. So her mobility is severely, severely impacted, and she cannot move her body without the assistance of levodopa, I think is the drug. And this book is told in sections of, like, the amount of pills and the time that she's taking the pills. So, like, this first section is morning, and it says second pill, which is brilliant, because that's kind of framing each section. Like, you're always reminded, because Elena is always reminded that she needs the pills to survive, that she's basically dependent upon these pills. And she talks about that a lot in this novel. She has some very salty names for the drugs as well. And repeatedly, you're just talking about how hard it is for her to move a limb. Like, she's like taking steps, like tiny step after tiny step after tiny step. And it never lets you forget that she has Parkinson's, because Elena can never forget that she has Parkinson's. And I think it did such a brilliant job of, like, putting you in that experience as much as you could be put in that experience without actually having Parkinson's yourself. And it does not shy away from it. She is not a likable character by any means, which I also love. She's very grumpy, and this is like pre-Parkinson's. Her and her daughter had a very complicated and fraught relationship, and I just loved so many things about this book. I thought the writing was amazing. I thought the, like, centering of chronic illness was amazing, and this also, like, took a fucking turn at the end. Took a turn, my friends, that I was not expecting, and I loved it. So this, so good. We're getting close to the end. Next book is Detransition Baby by Tori Peters. And this was my most anticipated release of 2021. Clearly bought the freaking new hardcover and then never read it in 2021. So I read it this year and loved it. I pretty much knew I was gonna love this based on all the reviews, but it was so good. So this is about, I mean, the plot is messy. Reese is a transgender woman, and she basically has always wanted to be a mother. Like, she wants to be a mother so badly. All her attempts to become a mother in the past have not been successful, and whether that's through like adoption or previous relationships or anything like that, they haven't worked out for her. And so she's kind of struggling with that. And then Ames, who she used to be in a relationship, has recently detransitioned, and they have detransitioned and then are also currently sleeping with their boss, whose name is Katrina. So Ames ends up getting Katrina pregnant and then reaches out to Reese, who they're no longer seeing, and basically proposes that the three of them raise the baby together so she can fulfill her dream of being a mother. And also, like, Ames has their own reasons for wanting to do that, which you discover throughout reading the book. I think it really explores like queerness, and I say it in quotes because it's not just like what it means to be queer, but like what it means to like live a queer life. And I mean that in like the queer theory type of way of like to queer things up, to not be in binaries is what I mean by that. And this shows so much exploration of what it would mean and what it might look like to not live within the binaries that we have placed upon ourselves in our culture, and really like globally. And that's not just gender binary, but that is a big topic in this book. But it's also like, why do we think that, you know, a child can only be raised by two people or one person? Like, why couldn't there be more? And I really loved all the commentary on that. I think it's just like, it's queer through and through, so smart. And it's like the author is trans themselves, so, which I think is really important in writing this book, because detransition alone has a ton of stigma associated with it, and this just navigated it so well. You had so much compassion for each character and what they were going through, but they're not perfect characters by any means. And I really loved it. It also explores ethnic binaries. So Katrina in this book is biracial, and it explores a lot of that. Like, just so many good binary crushing commentary going on here, and I love it. Love it, love it, love it. So highly encourage, if you have not already read this, pick this up. So great. All right, I think we're in our last two. So the book I read the most recently that I loved, and then I'll talk about my favorite book of the year, is Sauron, Bliss. And this is by Meg Mason. And this book probably needs no introduction. It was longlisted and shortlisted for the Women's Prize. And even before that, I mean, people were loving it. And I will say, I think I heard someone else talk about this. I think it was Louise Savage who said that the book is very much like in two parts, and I definitely agree with that. There's almost this like part pre-diagnosis and post-diagnosis. And the pre-diagnosis, well, actually I should talk about what this book is about. So this book is about a woman who at the start of the book, her marriage is like falling apart. And you start to explore why her marriage has fallen apart and how that relates to her mental illness. And in the book, it's never said what type of like mental illness she has, and that's done intentionally, obviously. And there's even a like disclaimer at the end of the book saying that like they specifically made the illness to not be associated with any specific diagnosis in the DSM, because they didn't want like someone inserting this illness here and then like making it only about that illness. So that is really important. And I think it really is like a few diagnoses cobbled together. But you follow how this has like deeply, deeply impacted our main character, her husband, her family, and she sort of discovers secrets along the way. So this book, like I said earlier, is kind of in two halves, pre-diagnosis and post-diagnosis. So the pre-diagnosis part is hard. At least it was hard for me to read, because I mean, she is not likable at all. She is like a straight up dick to her husband, like for real. And he comes off like very cinnamon rolly in the beginning, and you're just like, oh my gosh, why? Like, why is she doing this, and why is he staying, and what is going on here? And that part was really hard to read. It was hard to stay with that for so long. And then as it starts unfolding, you know, from the very beginning, you know that something's wrong, but you don't know what it is. And I think it like takes you on that journey that she feels of like, she knows something's wrong, but she doesn't know what it is. And there's lots of misdiagnoses along the way, and those impact her, being misdiagnosed and, you know, prescribed the wrong meds and all that type of stuff. And then she finally gets a diagnosis. We don't get it, but like she gets it in the book. And how that just like shakes her to her core. And she finds out a lot about the illness, and like a lot of it resonates with her, and she finds out a lot of secrets about, you know, the illness within her family and stuff like that. And yeah, I think the second half really saved the book for me, and I think is like where a lot of the meat in the book is. And I really loved it. I loved the commentary on mental health. I loved seeing this relationship that is almost like star-crossed lovers in a way. Like, they clearly do love each other so much, but it's just been so hard for them to stay together. And what that does to a person over a certain amount of time of just like continuously having to fight for something, that is really hard. The other thing in this that's lovely is the sister relationship. So she has a very close relationship with her sister, and I think it even talks about like them being soulmates. And I loved, loved, loved that representation of like not only this having of this one true like precious momentous relationship, but it being with someone who like is not romantic, who is not a romantic interest. And I loved that storyline for the sisters, and of that like undying love that they have for each other. So that was brilliant. Loved it. Of all the books on the Women's Prize long list or short list, that has been my favorite so far, and I've read like 5 of them, I think. That has definitely been my favorite. Okay, last book, and we just hit 30 minutes, so it's a good thing it's the last book. But that is Hola Papi. This book, let me tell you, this book. Okay, so this is by John Paul Brammer, and he is famous for, I don't know. He is known for a column also titled Hola Papi that is kind of like a queer advice column, and it's very funny. He's very funny. This is a memoir, and the subject, the like subheading is how to come out in a Walmart parking lot and other life lessons. And this follows much of his life. So it goes into his childhood, goes into him like discovering his queer identity and kind of the denial and then acceptance of that. And it goes through his exploration about being biracial. So he's biracial. It goes into a storyline of like him dating women before he's fully out, and what that experience is like and what those relationships meant to him, that I thought was just absolutely beautiful. Like, chef's kiss. Loved that part of the story. I cried during that part of the story. There's just so much packed in here, and it's done with such wit and humor. So good. I really enjoyed it. It also talks about the leading up to writing this book. So there's a lot of talk about writing in here. If you're interested in writing, I think this is a brilliant book to pick up. And it kind of chronicles his career from like writing a column to like all the other things he's done. There's a scene in a kitchen where he's basically trying to learn Spanish, and it's so funny. I loved it. I'm also biracial, so I connected with a lot of that in this book. I loved it. He is like so endearing, so likable, and so funny. Like so funny. So highly encourage anyone to pick this up. Very good, and it is like hands down my favorite book of the year. It's going to be surprising if anything tops this. But yeah, so that is it. Those are my best books of the year so far. I hope there's many more. So I'll see you in the next one. Bye.